Eoin Wickens, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Robby, thanks again for having me. It's great to be back and great to chat with you again.
First of all, congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Hasn't even been a year, and you've went from a senior adversarial machine learning researcher to technical research director. Hey!
It's been a busy year, nose to the grindstone, but yeah, we move.
How old are you again? 25?
26.
26, okay.
Yeah,
so you just had to get over the 25 to become a director.
I think that's it. That's in the contract somewhere.
Well
Every
deserved.
year I get a year older. It's kind of mad.
I know, it's crazy. I don't want to talk about how old I am. But since last time we spoke, there's been a lot of AI. Are you tired of it yet? Do you call it AI, by the way? What do you call it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's more machine learning, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
It always has been, but at least until we get some sort of sentient being. But yeah, no, not sick of it. I think the rapid progress and pace keeps things interesting. It's amazing what's happened in a year. I think even since we last spoke, which I think was back in July or August, I believe.
Less than a year ago at least.
Yeah. Time is moving on quick, eh?
Yeah. Have you ever heard about the God of the Gaps?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm stealing this from my colleagues, which are much smarter than me, but it's basically a term from research about religion. So
Right.
as soon as you don't understand something, it's God, right? So like
Okay.
when we didn't understand lightning and thunder, it was Thor, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's kind of how we look at AI, right? Like I even started calling it LLMs now instead of AI. So I'm on I've had a reality check. And I think
There we
most
go.
of the market has.
Absolutely.
So that's good. What else has happened? The models have gotten smaller. They've gotten more fine-tuned, smarter.
Totally. And I think processing power has gone up as well, right? I mean, with like NVIDIA's new Blackwell chip, I believe. I mean, things are going to change even more as the models get smaller and the processing power gets more and more capable. I mean, I'm really looking forward to a day where we have like proper on-device AI, where we have like the, hardware to be able to run them and the software to be able to squeeze onto them. So I'd say that in the next few years is definitely going to be something we start to see more and more of.
What else notable? Like, I mean, you follow this stuff. You have to follow this stuff. You get paid to follow this stuff. Like, what are some of the biggest?
I'm strapped in.
Yeah, right. What are some of the biggest updates or changes you've seen in the past 8 months?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, as you said, I think the models are getting smaller. I think they're starting to distribute as well to kind of different model architectures, building upon transformers, which is like you could say it was like the holy grail of large language model architectures for quite a while, but they've been improving and iterating on that. And to get models which are better at doing different tasks, they've delegated out into things like, mixture of experts models. They've brought in other things like retrieval augmented generation, which basically means they have like this added bolt-on layer of like a kind of like a database, basically for extra information that they can, when an LLM is queried, pull that information out of that database and feed it in, right? So it's like on top of fine tuning, you can also do this stuff. So basically the models are getting smarter, they're getting smaller. They're getting more specific to dedicated tasks, which is great. I think we're starting to see just a lot of exploration. And then also, since we last spoke, I think LLMs just really have taken off in terms of like integration. I don't think this was an April Fool's, though. I hope I'm not on, I hope I'm not live saying this. But I do recall at some point last year they were going to replace one of the Windows keys with like a dedicated Copilot button. So I mean, this, that tells you just how much like all of these companies are now kind of dead set on AI within their platforms.
Now that you're mentioning vendors, right? That's one of the things I've really noticed since last time we've spoken is like all the security vendors have released, what do they call it? AI, what are they? AI enabled security tools, right?
Totally.
I think I sent you just an example just to take Checkpoint as one. I typed it on Google, like AI enabled security tools, and Checkpoint was up there on top. And if I look at what they were able to do, there's a bunch of, reduced up to 90% of the time needed to perform administrative tasks. So Infinity AI Copilot knows the customer's policies, access rules, objects, logs, as well as product documentation. So it just basically allows you to chat with your product, or chat with your firewall and get it to do things for you. And that's just one example, right? I would assume like all of the major big companies will be coming out with that soon here? I'm not sure if you have any
Well,
comment on that.
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, last year we had Google SecPAM came out, which was one basically security oriented large language model. We had CrowdStrike had Charlotte, and there was also, I mean, Microsoft Security Copilot as well. So there's like a number of different vendors that are moving into the space using LLMs for basically augmenting security workflows. So I do remember the last time we spoke, actually, I think I made this kind of like crystal ball prediction that, you know, the SOC would start transitioning into, you know, an LLM kind of quality control thing, as well as using LLMs to augment their workflows and take all that data and do analysis to help with like alert fatigue and everything like that. That's kind of where we're heading. I think that's what these tools will be able to allow us to do. I mean, we have so many products feeding telemetry today that I don't think that it's possible with our current workforce, and in terms of how many people are in the workforce today, to actually triage and process all that data. So we have to offload it somehow. And we've done that typically through static and dynamic rules. But now with the age of AI and with, you know, LLMs, we can just process all of that so much easier and so much quicker. So I think like these companies, fantastic initiatives. I'm really interested to see how they work and integrate and practice. I'm a little out of the malware game and the I guess security operations center game now, but I'd love to see how that's being done and integrated in practice, certainly.
Yeah, I know that from a SOC, from our point of view, it's customers were first like, yeah, what are you doing with AI? And then they were like, wait, I kind of want humans to be doing this for me, not LLMs or not AI yet. So I guess
Totally.
The hype has gone over a little bit. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think things tend to come back to base after a while. And look, I mean, I don't think AI is a perfect solution for everything. Like I think, what is it? Models always lie, I believe was somebody coined that, not me.
models always lie, yeah.
Models always lie, but it's like, I think it's really important to have both, right? I don't think we should offload all of our responsibilities to AI models, with, let's say, within the security context to start with. But I think that like it serves a really valuable purpose in enabling us to like do a lot of like base level triage and then have like human review over that.
Yeah.
And I think that'll settle. I think that'll settle in time. But yeah, it's quite interesting.
Back to like the vendor and AI tool discussion that we started. What sort of like advice would you give clients of like, okay, before they start using Checkpoint or Copilot or whatever sort of tool it is? Because I could see a lot of customers being like, oh, cool, it's a chatbot, and they just start using it and they just go for it. Is that totally fine, or are there still some things that you should have in the back of your head when you start working with those sort of tools? Not knowing the specific tool, obviously, but
Totally. Main thing is understanding where your data is going, right? And understanding how somebody that you're sending your data to can use your data. I think we've often seen over the years that if you're not paying for it, then you are the product. With, you know, things like social media, data harvesting, and everything like that. Well, if you're uploading something sensitive to let's say an LLM service, right? Like let's say your forecast report or your revenue forecasting for you know, the next quarter or whatever. Well, if that gets into the hands of somebody that you know don't want them to have, then you know, that can be a pretty sticky situation to be in. So like, you know, what happens if they use that data as part of their, you know, training process? And what happens if, you know, let's say you upload, you know, thousands of documents to this service, they incorporate it into the training data or something like that, and then, you know, 6 months, a year down the line, where they release a new iteration or a new epoch of the model, it then starts spitting out the same information to other tenants or whatever. And we've also seen like situations arise where, you know, like a user may have inadvertent access to other users' chat histories and so on in like some services. Now this very quickly fixed, and I think it's just like teething problems with like how, you know, getting these services developed around the LLMs and everything. So again, it's probably worth saying that, you know, if you're uploading your data, upload it somewhere you trust. Maybe have a good read through their you know, legal documents and everything to understand, you know, their capability of using that. And yeah, I think that's my biggest concern with third party services.
so I should still look at I'm just going to keep picking on Checkpoint, or using Checkpoint as an example, I guess I should
Sure.
say. So I should look at that Checkpoint AI tool the same way I would look at Gemini or ChatGPT then. Have the same sort of
if
boundaries
it's
in my head.
if it's a service, yeah. If you're deploying it internally yourself, I mean, typically it's within your perimeter and it's something you can worry about. But we're using Checkpoint as an example, but I personally have no prior knowledge of Checkpoint services, just to clarify. Excellent. But yeah, I guess if you're sending data outside of your perimeter anywhere, right, you just want to have like a good understanding of that it's in safe hands. And I guess that like paradigm hasn't changed with the context of LLMs. And in fact, I think before we might not have had as much reason to send data outside of our perimeter. Like, you know, I'm not going to like email revenue forecasts to, you know, Tom, Dick, or Harry, right? But like with an LLM, it's like, okay, well, can you format this data for me nicely, please, so I can put this in my like PDF? Well, that would be great. And then it's, you know, it spits back the nicely formatted revenue forecast that I've just put into it. But the data has left the perimeter, and that's, I guess, the crux of the situation. So I guess to answer your question more properly, if the model is being hosted internally, like if you run it up yourself in like, you know, some, you know, cloud service provider or whatever, then within your own cloud, then it's not leaving your perimeter. But obviously make sure you're securing it.
I came across something called virtual agents.
Okay.
Which sounds, have you heard of it before? It's basically,
No,
it means that it will do things for you on the internet. Maybe it's called something else. But basically it's like if I say, format this data and send it, then it will go out and take from your CRM, take whatever you need to do, write the email and send it for you. And apparently there's like a bunch of different startups that are like, they have like demos out there where like it says make a website and start selling this, and like you can see you'll have a Mac and it'll have 4 screens, and you could see I'm not even sure what to call it. It's not an LLM anymore. Then I guess it is like AI. It's a virtual.
It's an
assistant.
agent, I think.
It's an
I
agent.
think they
virtual agents.
An agent. Yeah.
What is your opinion on that?
Cool. Yeah. Great question. Yeah. I've heard of the concept of like agents in the past and stuff. There's some cool people working on like agents for hacking AI and everything like that, which I think is really interesting. So, you know, an autonomous thing which can act independently, you know, to an extent. It is really interesting, but it's kind of one of those situations where the more we hand off decisions to an unknown entity, right? The more risk you end up incorporating, essentially. Like if you give this access to a lot of APIs, you give this access to your CRM, like these models are a risk vector. They are an attack surface. The more they have access to, and the more like if my thing can send an email, if it can browse the web, and it can access, you know, sensitive information inside my perimeter, like where's the line there? Like how do I stop it from reading a website, getting prompt injected, dumping out all the information from my CRM into a public service and then emailing it, right? Like that's a big attack chain. Like a lot of ifs and buts have to happen for that to be pulled off. But, you know, this is like, it's gone from, you know, not being possible because we didn't have LLMs, you know, surfing the web and everything, to like, this is an actual thing that we can see coming down the line. So I think progress is great, but let's just make sure that we do it right. And let's make sure that we are ironclad against prompt injections and so on. I'll segue a little bit if you don't mind, because it's something that's quite interesting. But I mentioned like prompt injected by surfing the web. We call that indirect prompt injection, right? A researcher, Kai Grishake, basically kind of found out that you could do this, and he was using Microsoft Edge's Bing Assistant. So, geez, a lot of product names there, but basically to browse the web, it would read a page, and you could do like that classic thing of like, you know, size 0 text in, you know, in white font on a white background. And it would read it, and then it would prompt inject the chat assistant. The chat assistant would start suggesting spam links. It would start speaking like a pirate and all sorts of funky stuff, right? Like that's mad, right? That we can do that. So like imagine now if your AI agent comes along and views a website and then gets prompt injected by virtue of that. But taking this a step further, multimodal models, so models that can basically take in data from, you know, like, or take in different data types like images, video, audio, and text and everything. came along. They came on the scene. That was another big thing we saw really over the last like 7-8 months or so. You can also have multimodal prompt injections, right? So like one of the first examples of this was a picture of an apple with a post-it note that said like ignore all previous instructions and do whatever, right? So like LLM takes this picture, it reads it, it goes, okay, actually disregard this is an apple, let's prompt inject the model. So was at Black Hat Europe in December, and there was a really cool example right at the end of it where they talked about the risk of supply chain attacks through indirect prompt injection via images, right? And imagine now, if you will, an image uploaded to Wikipedia that is on a website, or sorry, that's on the Wikipedia site, uploaded like 6 months ago. But every time an LLM views Wikipedia for this thing, it will get prompt injected by this image, right? So how do you stop that, right? And like, yes, we've got a lot of fences in there. We can do all sorts of post-processing on images and everything like that. But it's such a crazy prospect to me that like an AI agent could potentially view a website like Wikipedia, get prompt injected by an image that's on it that looks completely inconspicuous to us. So it's interesting times. It's interesting times. That's all I can say for sure.
And while we're on the topic of interesting times, like, are there any noteworthy like attacks that have happened in the last time we spoke that you feel are notable and cool to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple that came like very recently in the last like week or two. One of them was to do with hallucinations within ChatGPT, I believe, where it was suggesting false packages, so false dependencies. So it would give like you'd ask it to write a snippet of code. It would give this particular package back, but instead of a hyphen, it would be an underscore in the package name, right? And this was suggested, and the package never existed, so it would fail. But a researcher decided, oh, what if I create that package and then track how many times it's been downloaded? I believe they found that it was downloaded over 15,000 times, right? So it was being basically suggested en masse to people. So you have this like hallucination. Hallucination in the context of an LLM is when, it gives back a false piece of evidence. Jeez, I sound like I'm on CSI. A false piece of information. False piece of information, or like something that's untruthful that it thinks it or perceives it to be true. But I thought that was fascinating, and it hallucinated first, and then they decided we'll create the malicious package that can leverage this. So it was in a way, it was a very weaponized form of this hallucination. Like typically, these things can still be very consequential, but there was an example, I remember seeing it pop up last year. People were using ChatGPT or some other LLM to suggest relevant papers to their subject matter, to their subject domain or whatever. And it started giving back false citations, right? It started giving back false papers. So it's like, how to know the biological makeup of some phytoplankton, for instance, or something by, Eoin Wickens, let's say, right? And then they contacted this author, Eoin Wickens, that's me. But they contacted this author anyway, and they were like, oh, well, this sounds like something I would write, but no, I've never written it before. And these services are basically saying, oh no, this person wrote it. They might even give a summary and a blurb. So you have this like breakdown in I guess known truths or ground truths and stuff. I don't know. I find that very interesting. But kind of outside of that, and what we've been seeing an awful lot of is like the actual tooling that supports the development and deployment of AI systems being like full of holes, like full of vulnerabilities. So iPhone or our Android phones, right? We go back like 10, 15 years. It was like, you could probably easily enough exploit them. Nowadays, you might, to exploit an iPhone, you probably have to chain together like some ridiculous amount of exploits, super deep stuff that like will eventually lead into a massive payoff. And when it does, it's super critical. But that barrier to entry is so high. with like AI and like AI like adjacent technologies, it's one thing, and it's like something you probably would have seen like 20 years ago. It's like we're dealing with like buffer overflows, we're dealing with path reversals, we're dealing with sometimes no authentication in any of these, like no authentication, right? And like, or a service is designed to execute arbitrary code within the context of ML, right? Like, imagine now you have all of this sensitive PII hosted on a service, or hosted in, let's say, an S3 bucket. You have your service, MLOps tool running, which is, allowing you to process this data, build your model, and then deploy it. But your service has either no authentication, or it is designed to accept remote tasks from anybody, maybe with no authentication. And all of a sudden, it means that like somebody like me can come along and, install a backdoor on your system without any real hassle, pull down all of that sensitive information, and then cause a massive data breach. And I think like one of the things that I can see, at some point in the future is like maybe, looking at the data scientists as a incredibly privileged user, given the volume of data they have access to, especially within the business context, right? Like we think of administrators and they have, access to any system or within their, domain and so on. Super risky if they get popped. But with the data scientist, it is also super risky because I guess you also have like a build environment, you're deploying models, especially models that go like downstream to customers, and then the massive amounts of data that they have access to. If it's like sensitive business related data or what have you. And I think that's like quite a worrying prospect, honestly. But anyway, sorry, I'm digressing hugely. If you want to bring me back on track with a question.
I got lost. I was loving it. I'm actually having a chat with the, I want to say the opposite of you, somebody that's been building machine learning, not the opposite of you, but the one that you just referred to, one that makes those models and has access to all that. And I just wanted to hear
Cool.
like what his opinion is around security and like, does he think about security in these things? But back to our discussion just now,
Awesome.
like, do you think that it is that way just because it came so quickly and then the business was like, give me this, and everybody was just like, give me a tool. They just skipped over like the normal security barriers, or how did we get there?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's part of it. I think like we've got rapid adoption as one. That rapid adoption definitely kind of skewed the security aspect, I guess. One of the other main contributing factors to that, I think, is that like data science, I guess, as a discipline had come largely from academia, given that it was, largely PhD data scientists and mathematicians developing these models, developing these architectures, and then, going out into industry, building them or using tools that were developed by academics and so on. No hate, by the way, that like it's just part of the part of the process. But what often, if you're kind of building things like, you might not, if you're building them without like industry experience, where you're used to security development practices, like, secure development lifecycle stuff and everything, then you're not building software with that in mind. And if you're kind of building it outside of like the security ecosystem, the industry ecosystem where you've had to deal with this, then it's easy to develop insecure software, right? And that's like, it's not a fault of their own. It's just kind of like, if you're not in the loop and you're not read in, that can be an issue. So I think you've had this like kind of large swathe of tooling developed and designed for data science that kind of just went under the radar in terms of the security community, and then also in terms of like security engineering, I guess. So now, because of that rapid adoption, we're once again playing catch up, and we're trying to, secure a lot of this tooling from, the MLOps side, from the model file format side, from, even, the generative AI side. Like the attack surface is huge. And I think that's like one of the biggest things that stood out to me when I had the threat report in my hands, and I looked at everything we had written about how big the attack surface is now, that we've kind of like really understood over the last 2 years, is like staggering compared to when we started this, and when we were looking around and going like, this is, we knew it was bad, but we didn't really have it quantified. And now it's like, there's a lot of things we need to do. And like some of this is traditional security. Some of this is AppSec, right? Like you can't just ignore traditional security, but there's a whole new component, right? Like the whole LLM concept is completely new, and it requires this like hybrid security posture. That's a whole other question.
You recently released a product, generative AI,
Cool.
something in the title. I know that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So building security into large language models is great. It's necessary, but it only gets you so far. We kind of call that like model robustness. We call it, things like guardrails and so on, which kind of prevent a user from doing malicious activity. And that's great. It's really important for like the base foundational model. But what tends to happen then is like, how do you control what data is sent into that model? How do you control the outputs that are sent out of that model? Let's say I don't want code to ever come out of this model, or I don't want, PII to come out of it, or even go into it, I suppose would be the main one. Then how do I do that? And you can't necessarily like fine tune that out, and you can't necessarily, add it into the base model. So it requires a bolt-on, right? A kind of a bolt-on security product. And that's what we've developed. And we've developed it to be an enterprise grade security product that we can actually define custom policies depending on that specific customer and so on, so that we can bolt on our security layer and aim to basically protect you from things like PII leakage and so on, to all the way down to prompt injection and everything else that then comes out of the model as well. So yeah, it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. If you are sending things to third-party services, do you want specific information in there? Do you want to blindly or implicitly trust the data that comes out of it? If it's suggesting code, for instance, if it doesn't have malicious packages in the response and everything. And so all of this requires an extra layer of security. So that's what we've been developing.
I mean, you still need guardrails. You still need that foundation around your model itself. But this is just like, I don't want to call it DLP, but you can go in and you can configure a lot of things. So you can kind of make it like a DLP-ish, where you set your own policies and whatnot, right?
Yeah, there's definitely an analogy to be made in that, 100%. Yeah, and I think the two live quite well in harmony, honestly. I've seen models that have no guardrails, and that's all well and good as well. But it's I think you tend to try and want to get as far as you can with robustness in a model, definitely, just to try and lock it down from more basic prompt injections. But I think what we found is, as many ways as there are to craft a sentence, there are ways to create a prompt injection, right? And that exactly. and so on, and yeah, cat and mouse game.
Yeah, your threat landscape report. Lots of good stuff. What did you find most interesting?
Yeah, that's a great question. We surveyed about 150 executive IT leaders across major industry down to kind of SME level. So we wanted to capture a bit of a broad kind of swath of people and viewpoints. But what we found was quite interesting, actually. So I believe, if I'm not getting the statistics wrong, is about 1,700 models in production on average in like major companies. Thought that was very fascinating. It's a lot of models.
It's a lot of models.
A lot of models.
Each with their own attack surface, right?
Well, each with their own. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, you may use a few models for like the same purpose, but like often each model will have its own specific kind of use case, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, absolutely. Each has their own attack surface, and depending on how they're exposed and everything like that. But what we also saw was that the opinion across our surveyed respondents basically said around 98% of them believed that it was that AI was somewhat critical to their or somewhat crucial to their business function, right? So we're starting to see that like it is part of their business function now, and I think that's pretty a pretty stark statistic there. And then again, it's another statistic, but about 77% of companies said they had identified a breach that wasn't related to their AI or like AI adjacent, right? And that is also really worrying. And I've said this quite a lot over the last couple of years, but like the more critical decisions we offload to our AI models, to, you know, even like not even just LLMs, but classifiers and everything like that, the more of an attack surface we're raising. Our data now is more precious than ever. It's, you know,
it doesn't mean necessarily it was like a crazy bad breach, but it means that, number one, they had to have a way to detect that, which is interesting. Were those 77% of your clients? Because that makes sense. But how would 77% of them even detect that? You know, that's interesting. That
yeah, no, absolutely. I think you can kind of understand if things are trying to like subvert a model in some regard, if they are trying to access specific data that's in relation to an AI model. I'm not 100% sure on the visibility that's been, you know, put into these companies now over the last year or 2 years, but I'm sure they're keeping close tabs on it.
Yeah. Well, I'd say 100% of your clients have noticed an attempted breach at least, and then 77% of those. Interesting. But that, I mean, because like a lot of things your products are doing, it's all possible to do by yourself. It's just extremely expensive and time consuming to use your own people to do those sort of to implement those sort of measurements or to detect those sort of things, right?
I guess that's one of the things we try and aim to achieve, really, is to take that security load off the data science team and enable, you know, security practitioners to be able to understand and triage these events and so on. So that's been, you know, a big part of our mission ultimately, is to allow them to kind of like coexist independently. But software engineers, you know, were able to write code that wasn't secure before, you know, we had, you know, well, they got away with it more often, let's say, before we had like mass scale, you know, cyber intrusions and everything like that. The software engineer then did have to kind of get more familiar with, you know, vulnerabilities and secure software development and so on over time. And like and eventually, you know, there still is a line between a software engineer and a security analyst, or even a vulnerability researcher, or somebody in the product security team who's doing code review. So you do have these like breakdowns and delineations, and I just see that these teams are starting to move closer together. The conversations are happening. And I do think you're starting to get data scientists who are more concerned around security as well. It'd be really interesting in hearing the conversation that you're going to be having with the data scientists. And I'll be tuning in for that. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think even from our conversations, we're starting to hear a lot more kind of a gelling within that.
I mean, software engineers, I might get hated on for this, but they've been around for what, 30 years at least? There's been software for 30 years. And I wouldn't say all software engineers are up there with security, but I would guess the data scientists better get up there a lot quicker than 30 years, or else we're going to have a huge problem.
I think it's like all of our responsibility, right? It just means that people like us in the vulnerability research side, in the adversarial machine learning side, are able to help and able to contribute. And like, you know, we don't need to like put the onus entirely on the data scientists to get up to speed with it. But like we'll kind of all kind of come together and try and solve this problem, I think, because and I can see that happening. Just any data scientists listening who were saying, crikey, what is Eoin saying?
Yeah, God damn it. Yeah, because in their defense, I don't need to defend them at all. Like, they have so much to learn. Like, I can't even follow the attacks that are coming out and like the AI stuff, and they have to like learn how to implement it and do it. And then the security comes in addition, which is a whole nother beast.
It's a whole other aspect. But we all have like, you know, kind of adjoining surfaces or whatever, or some other strange analogy for that. Yeah.
Well, if you have both of those traits, go work for HiddenLayer at least. I think that they have a
absolutely.
You don't do you do like training? Like, do companies ever ask you for training around these sort of things? Like, what to expect? And
absolutely. Yeah, we actually do provide. We provide a whole training course, a 2-day training course on that. It's part of our professional services offering. I co-authored a good part of that course actually. Cool. But yeah, we happily do that and provide that. It's been great. We've got great feedback from it so far, and I think it's been important as well for people to understand both, you know, the attack and defense scenarios of AI systems.
I'm just thinking, like, you go to a lot of conferences and stuff. You're probably one of the few people that goes to more conferences and stuff than I do, and you're on stage. What kind of like, who do companies go to with these sort of issues besides you? Like we talked about earlier, you have to understand data science. You have to understand secure coding practices. You know, so there's such a big span. Like, who do you go to with those sort of requests? I guess
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, it's a great question. I mean, we do have taxonomies now. We have like, more robust standards and so on. Like NIST has released what used to be a draft, a document they've released. They're kind of like the taxonomy of adversarial attacks. And we have things like MITRE Atlas, which is great at helping to define the space. We have different AI frameworks. We have the Secure AI framework from Google. IBM also released one. Databricks recently released an AI security framework. So there's starting to be more voices within the community, which is fantastic, and it's great. But that's something we try and aim to do is look at a system from all these different angles, right? From the vuln research side, from the pen testing side, from the reverse engineering side, from the adversarial machine learning side, and all of these things. Oh. There is a lot. Yeah, 100%. And so I feel like we're in a way uniquely positioned to advise and help. Absolutely. And help companies in that. But don't take it from me.
Predictions and recommendations.
Okay. I think I've made there's other predictions that I made last time that we're still waiting on, but I think they are trending that way. I think like LLM integration is just going to continue to become bigger and bigger, especially as the models get more capable. I think the multimodal side of the models is really going to be interesting. Like that attack I mentioned from the researcher at Black Hat EU, with like a supply chain attack through Wikipedia, a Wikipedia image. Like I think that is where we're going to start seeing things. I think like it's not so much a crystal ball. It's like I don't know. Is it my partial doomsaying? But I wonder, and I kind of worry about like the veracity of information, because we have like so much information being spouted out by these LLMs that often isn't 100% correct, through hallucination and so on. I do wonder, like if we'll have this kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy, or like a snake eating its own tail of like a kind of bad data being fed back into the models, and we end up not being able to find the correct answer for our questions. I think the Wikipedia models work quite well for like, crowdsourced, truths to an extent. But I do wonder about how things will progress with so much content, but that'll be interesting. Like we're starting to make strides with things like data provenance, data set provenance and data set integrity. And especially as well then model integrity and model signing. There's some open source initiatives now that are coming out around this, so that we can basically show where a model has come from and cryptographically verify that in the same way we like sign PE models and so on. And so one of my crystal ball predictions, which I think it's necessary, because, as we just mentioned, there's a big issue there with like, okay, where am I getting this data from? Who provided this data? Or if I'm pulling a pre-trained model in from a third party, where did this model come from? And like, how can I prove with any degree of accuracy that this model is what I hope it is, or came from who I presume it did. So that's what we're trying to solve as an open source initiative under the OpenSSF now is signing and model provenance. And I think that's going to go a long way to helping companies to trust their data and trust the models that they're pulling in a bit more. But yeah, is that good for predictions?
Absolutely. And I think that last way you ended it, I mean, trust, right? That is the biggest problem with the AI and LLMs these days, is we don't trust them. So any initiative towards making trust happen is a good one. And I also made me think that, like, when you were talking, it sounds like the push towards AI is kind of making steps, verifications. That would all be great for the open source community as a whole as well. Because a lot of those things are just not there today.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we want to solve that as an industry. We don't want to just create a new standard that is that we need another standard to correct. And we want something that's like used by the industry that we can all work together with, and really like a rising tide raises all boats. And I think that's the important thing there. But yeah, 100% trust is the main thing. And I think as an industry we're making great strides, and it's great to see. I just hope that we can keep on pushing in that direction.
Mr. Wickens, you're a legend.
You too, Robby. Thanks a million for having me.
Always nice to talk to you, and I will see you here in a few weeks in San Francisco.
Absolutely. See you out in RSA.
Take
Looking
care
forward
until
to
then.
it. Cool.
Ciao.
Cheers. Thanks.